And lively discussion. Welcome. This is day 2, as you all know, of the Antalya Diplomatic Forum. And as you may know, Antalya is not only a place for nice beaches and nice holidays, but it's also a place of, we could say, the historical meeting point of different civilizations. I'm sure you know, Mr. Minister, that there are a lot of historical ancient civilization sites in this region. So with that in mind, I guess we can say it's appropriate for a venue to be held here in this location for an event which seeks engagement despite differences between different parties in the region. And talking about different parties in the region, talking about engagement, we're delighted to have here on the stage a statesman, a world diplomat who needs really little introduction, Javad Zarif, the Foreign Minister of Iran, of course, represents one of the leading countries in this part of the world. He represents also one of the most sensitive issues you've been involved in, the Iran nuclear file, as well as he represents a country with considerable influence throughout the region and in many a hotspot, from Syria to Iraq to Yemen and so on. So there's a lot for us to get into today. I have a lot of questions, and I'm sure the Minister will live up to his usual grace of accepting all kinds of questions, sometimes critical ones, and we look forward to a really interesting discussion. We've started a little late, but hopefully we won't go too much over, and we'll still be in time for coffee break. It'll be all important. Welcome, Minister. Let's get straight into it. In addition to all the issues I've mentioned, of course, we have a very important issue going on in Iran these days, the presidential election. Allow me to ask you, with only 7 approved candidates out of 590 which were barred from running, including a former president, including a Speaker of Parliament, the question I think on the minds of many people is, can you honestly say that this election represented the free will of the Iranian people?
Well, first of all, it's very good to be with you, and good morning to all of you. I guess all of us may have our views about the procedures for screening of candidates. Without trying to compare, there are procedures for screening candidates in all societies. Some are more open and more transparent, some are less transparent, some are open, less transparent, like if you don't have money, you don't get to be nominated by a major political party in the United States. If you don't have major money supporting you, you don't get to be nominated by major political parties in the US. Look at Bernie Sanders, look at, you want to go back, the difference between Howard Dean and Michael Dukakis in the US in the earlier days.
So there may be discrepancies for sure and failures in a lot of systems, but when the Iranian Supreme Leader said on June the 6th that some of the disqualified candidates were wronged, doesn't that actually mean the people were wronged by not having the choices that some of them might want to have had?
Actually, it means that even the Supreme Leader can state something and not be immediately responded to by the legal body. I have my...
Yeah, they didn't rectify it.
It wasn't rectified. It shows that they believe that they stick to certain procedures. But be it as it may.
But does that mean the people were deprived and wronged as well, and not having some of the choices they deserved?
They were. Many of us were surprised, many of us were disappointed. But at the end of the day, today, Mr. Raisi is the president of all Iranians. We have to respect the electoral procedures. Almost 20 million people voted for him. So in most cases, that would mean that he represents the country. From now on, every one of us will have to work in a way, whether we disagreed with him or whether we agreed with him, whether we liked his policies or whether we disliked his policies, he is now elected by the people. In an election which may not be 100% what we want it to be, but in an election, at the end of the day, in which people participated and people voted. Turnout was better than expected, not our usual. Our usual is above 70%. This time was below 60%. So the turnout was less. Apathy seems to be a problem. What was the reason for apathy? You will see differences of views in Iran. If you look at the Council of Guardians, they say people's popular apathy is because of the performance of our government. If you listen to me, I may say it was because of some of the disqualifications. But be it as it may, there are various ways of analyzing it, but today we need to look forward, and we need to look at a situation where we have a president who is elected, who is a reasonable man. I have worked with him for 30 years. I know him pretty well. He's a decent man. He's a reasonable man. And he will be able to manage the country. And I believe the foreign policy of Iran, which is based on consensus, will continue.
Okay, before we get into foreign policy, you've planted a lot of seeds in my mind, actually. I checked the latest news, which I checked about 10 minutes ago, was the final result was not officially announced. So can we consider this the first official announcement that indeed Mr. Raisi has won the elections?
Well, no, you can't, because I'm not the responsible authority.
But you've kind of already said it, Mr. Minister, so I think we're going to take it that way.
I already said, based on the analysis that we have. What we have is...
Also the voter turnout.
We have almost 29, less than 30 million voter turnout. That we know already. Because
is that now an official?
The ballots.
Can you give us the official number?
No,
because
the official number will be given to you by the Minister of Interior inside Iran, not by somebody sitting in Antalya.
Okay, but here's the point, Mr. Minister.
Receiving his information on WhatsApp.
Understood, but here's the point. The latest numbers which I read was a turnout of 37% as of 7:30 p.m. last night Iran time, according to the Fars news agency. Yeah. It's actually expected that turnout is going to be well below 50%.
No, it will be well above 50%, because the usual turnout in Iran is after evening, because our election is during summertime or late springtime, very hot. People tend to come late to the polling stations. So last night, the ministry announced that 29 million voter ballots had been counted. That is, had been issued. So it means that 29 million people voted. Since Mr. Raisi got about 15 million people votes, it means that he got over 50%. But the official announcement will come from the Interior Ministry, and I have no official position in Antalya to talk about something that just happened.
Give me your opinion, though. If the result is if the turnout is less than 50%, would you be worried about the legitimacy of the government?
Well, I'll be worried about people's apathy. And
what about the legitimacy?
The legitimacy of the government is based on performance and based on the constitutional process. The constitutional process is there, but people's apathy is a problem. And we need to be careful in Iran, and we need to look at in a sober way, without trying to blame each other, why people are not turning out in the numbers that we expect them to turn out. I believe part of it is because of the domestic infighting that we had over the past 8 years. Part of it is because of the fact that some even portrayed our diplomatic achievements in JCPOA as a national failure. Well, that results in people's apathy. Well, it tells you that we have a very lively political debate in Iran, which is not, unfortunately, present in much of the region anyway. So we are way ahead of most countries in the region in terms of being able to have a lively political debate. I hope that will continue in a constructive way during Mr. Raisi's tenure as the next president of Iran.
That segues nicely to my next point. You've handled the Iran nuclear file and issue for many years. Do you think this election, do you think the new government that will come, the new president, does any of that change the prospects for a return to the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal?
Well, I think the JCPOA negotiations are underway right now. There is a good possibility that we will reach an agreement before the end of our tenure.
How soon, sir?
Well, we are supposed to leave office by mid-August. And I think there's a good possibility that we can reach an agreement way before mid-August.
So the talks are going good?
The talks are going on right now as we speak. I just read the latest text and edited it that is being discussed in Vienna.
Are all major obstacles passed now?
The text is getting cleaner and cleaner. The brackets are being removed. And
I know you're being a diplomat, and this is a diplomacy format,
yeah,
but
so
I'm sure you'll understand as well that as a journalist, I want to push you a little further. What is remaining? What are the remaining stumbling blocks?
Well, the remaining stumbling block is a recognition. I mean, if you continue our conversation, I will tell you that most of our problems are problems of cognizance. Most of our problems are cognitive. The problem is the United States has to come to the recognition that it was the United States that left the deal with an objective, and that objective was not achieved. Now it is coming back to the deal, so it cannot dictate the objectives that it couldn't achieve through economic war on the negotiating tables. I think that's a cognitive transformation that the US administration needs to make, and I think we are getting there, but not there yet.
Is there still an issue over the demands that a return to the nuclear deal should also include new conditions concerning Iran's missile program, concerning Iran's policies in the region, or have both parties, Iran and the US, now overcome?
Well, it was clear that those issues were addressed in the nuclear deal.
So you're past that now?
Oh, yeah. We passed that 6 years ago.
So what's left, Minister? Give us
What's left is how we verify US implementation. Because how we implement is verified by the IAEA. How the US implements is unclear. How we verify it. We complied with our commitments until the US withdrew, and even 1 year after the US withdrew. The US did not comply. So the party that needs to give us confidence is the United States. Our confidence will be, the confidence about our behavior will be provided by the Atomic Energy Agency. So this is the sticking point, how to verify. They agree that we need to verify. They understand that. But the question is how to verify. And we are working on various methodologies. As you know, we have a legislation by our parliament that we have to stick to. We have to report to the parliament, and now everybody recognizes that we need to have approval from our parliament before we can resume implementation of JCPOA. So these are the issues that are being worked out right now. I don't think they are insurmountable, but they are still there. The text is being cleared.
And that, you think, can be done before August 2021, probably?
I guess if there is...
Well before, I think
I mean, if there is a will, there is a way.
Okay. Do you think the current US administration, would you say now, the Joe Biden administration, does not want to follow the policy of the Trump administration towards Iran?
Well, I think Joe Biden understands that the policy of the Trump administration has failed. But still, he wants to use that policy as leverage. And that's where the cognitive problem comes in. So I think they have to abandon the fact that sanctions are an asset. Sanctions are a liability. Sanctions are illegal. Sanctions are unlawful. Unfortunately, the Europeans have been forced into basically succumbing to US sanctions. But it doesn't mean that they approve it. It doesn't mean that they accept it. US was isolated. Probably if you follow the history of the Security Council, US twice presented a resolution in the Security Council that was defeated 13-2. That's unheard of. US presented a resolution in the General Assembly that was defeated 110-6. These are unheard of. And the US must understand that it is fully isolated. Now, the US has economic might. The US has power over financial institutions. The US can impose its will, but it does not mean that it has the legitimacy, international legitimacy for what it did. And that is why our European friends are now talking about the need for some sort of autonomy some sort of European strategic autonomy. They started thinking about strategic autonomy after the United States prevented them from going through with their own promises, with their own commitments, in an agreement that they considered the triumph of their diplomacy.
You've met Joe Biden.
Not recently.
Not recently, but
I did meet him many times.
2003, I think, at least one time. What do you think of him? Do you think Joe Biden is an honest politician?
Let's not get into that.
What?
You remember?
You're a very seasoned statesman.
You remember Winston Churchill going in a cemetery and says, "Here lies an honest politician," and he said, "There must be two people under this grave." So that's a difficult
putting aside all
question to ask me.
Doubts about well, I do want to ask you that. Okay,
Joe Biden is
vis-a-vis his
politician.
policy to Iran, do you think that he is honest in wanting in his approach to Iran? Do you think he's trustworthy?
I think Joe Biden is more realistic about Iran. I think he knows Iran better.
Do you trust him?
No. In diplomacy, nobody trusts anybody else. If anybody tells you I trust my counterpart, they're lying to you. Nobody in diplomacy trusts the other side. Mm-hmm. In diplomacy, you need to verify. Well, you need to create confidence. You need to create predictability. That's what diplomacy is all about. But diplomacy does not mean you put your trust in somebody else. They are about to get their own policy, their own interest. Diplomacy is not love affair. That's what I tell
but do you feel you can do business?
My students, diplomacy is not love affair.
Can you feel you can do business with Joe Biden?
I think it is easier to do business with Joe Biden. Everything is relative in this world. Mm-hmm. It is easier to do business with Joe Biden than it was with Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. That's all you can say about this.
Might Iran increase its enrichment of uranium beyond 63%, I think was the latest announcement?
Well, if we go back to JCPOA, then we have to stick to our commitments under JCPOA, that is 3.7%.
But if it doesn't happen soon enough?
If it doesn't happen, then we have no limit.
So you will exceed 63%?
We may not. It depends on whether that's a decision that we will make without any limitation.
What's the timeline? When do you feel you would have to make that decision and say, listen, we've given this enough time, the other side is dragging its feet, we're going to go ahead and enrich uranium more than 63%?
Well, you see, even now we can do that, but we don't need to. We made our point that we are capable of doing that. We don't have a pressing need tomorrow for 90% enriched uranium.
All right, not tomorrow, but are we talking a few weeks, a few months?
Well, if we come to that point, then we can make that decision. But we don't need that. We made our point. We showed our capability. We don't want to build nuclear weapons. We made that point too. We made that point through a religious decree, which is based not only on theology, but also on strategy. So we have made a decision, and we have made a point that we have the capability.
How are talks going with Saudi Arabia? You've had talks in Iraq, in Baghdad?
Well, it's good that we have talks.
I think you had talks as well in Russia after that? It's what's been reported, at least. No? Okay.
No, we had 3 rounds of talks in Baghdad, and now everybody is waiting for the presidential election. Of course, our representation was included the National Security Council, which is basically beyond politics and not representing one branch of government. We also had representatives from the Foreign Ministry, from the Intelligence Ministry, from the military. So it created the image, I hope, for our Saudi neighbors that this is a national decision. This is not a decision by one branch of the government or by the Foreign Ministry or Intelligence Ministry. But we are committed to this because we believe that we are neighbors, and we believe nobody can buy security from outside. Our neighborhood doctrine is that we are bound to live together forever, and we will remain in the neighborhood. Others will come and go. Now, you look at the situation in Afghanistan. The Americans are simply negotiated their escape from Afghanistan with the exact same people they came to replace, with the exact same people. So anybody who can trust on an outside power to maintain their security, to provide them with a shield against others, is badly mistaken. Again, I'll come back to the cognitive problem. We need to have a recognition in this neighborhood that security cannot be purchased, that security cannot be brought from outside. Outsiders have their own interests. No outsider will do your bidding. They are doing their own bidding. If Israel wants to have normalization with United Arab Emirates or others, it's doing it for its interest, not for their interest.
Right. Will Saudi Arabia and Iran have diplomatic relations soon, do you think?
I'm ready to send an ambassador to Saudi Arabia tomorrow.
But do you think it'll happen tomorrow?
That depends on them.
Are you close to resolving your issues in these talks which have been going?
Talking is better than not talking.
Well, we know that, Ambassador, but you're couching your answers in very diplomatic terms, which I want to drag you out of.
I cannot negotiate with our... first of all, I'm not the negotiator, and secondly, I cannot negotiate with them over television, but it is possible. There is no reason that we should not be able to resolve our differences.
Okay, let me ask you a critical question about Yemen. Yemen's foreign minister recently said Iran is smuggling arms to Houthi militias and it's destroying Yemen. Are you arming the Houthis?
Well, you see, the Houthis, the Yemenis, actually, because we're not talking about just the Houthis. We're talking about the National Salvation Government in Sana'a, which includes the Congress Party, which includes the Houthis, Ansar Allah, includes others. But the Yemenis fought foreigners for centuries. Nobody has been able to conquer Yemen. They don't need anybody's arms to defend themselves.
But are you sending?
They will defend themselves. But what I can tell you is those who are bombing Yemeni schools, those who are bombing Yemeni hospitals, those who are bombing Yemeni markets, those are destroying Yemen, not Iran.
Okay, but are you sending the arms, Minister? You haven't answered the question.
We proposed in April of 2014, days into Yemeni conflict, that we should have a ceasefire, humanitarian assistance, intra-Yemeni dialogue, and an inclusive government with good relations with its neighbors. That offer stands. Unfortunately, at that time, although the United States asked Saudi Arabia and got a first preliminary approval from the late Prince Saud al-Faisal to have a ceasefire, it was overruled by MBS. MBS then believed that he could overcome Yemen in 3 weeks. Now it's over 6 years. Time to come to the understanding, and let me make one more point. Again, a cognitive problem. They have to recognize that what they could not gain through a war, they will not be able to gain through negotiating table. They have to realize that they need to come to the middle ground, that they cannot impose their will on the other side, either through military or through diplomacy. Diplomacy is to understand how to get to yes. And to understand how to get to yes, you have to put yourself in the other person's shoes and be able to recognize their interest. Otherwise, if you want to maximize your own interest, you will never get to yes.
Okay, you are a very patient diplomat, so although I've asked you the question 3 times, I'm sure you'll be patient enough for a 4th one. Are you arming the Houthis, though?
I think the Houthis have the capability to arm themselves. You see, we cannot...
People will take away, Minister, the fact that you didn't answer, people will take away from that maybe you are. What would you say to that?
Let me tell you, we have not been able even to send food and medicine to Yemen. How can we send arms?
So you're saying you don't?
We don't need to. They know how to build their own arms.
Iraq, the Iraqi tribal leader, Ali Hatim Suleiman, says Iran arms the PMF militias and uses them to exert control over Iraq. Is he wrong as well?
Well, they have forgotten that when Daesh was on the doorsteps of Baghdad, When Daesh was on the doorsteps of Erbil, we provided arms. We did provide arms, a lot of it. When nobody was prepared to help Barzani fight Daesh, the late martyr General Soleimani sent 2 plane loads of weapons, plus a lot of advisors, to Iraqi Kurdistan to defeat Daesh. Of course, the Iraqis, Arab, Kurd, Shia, Sunni, they were the ones who fought the Daesh. But we are proud that we have been with them.
But he's saying now that you use these militias to control even the Prime Minister of Iraq. Is he wrong?
You see, we don't control anybody. The relationship between Iran and its friends, it's not the relationship of a proxy. We're not like others who pay. You remember once when we were getting to the end of the nuclear deal, John Kerry told me, with all this money that you get from the nuclear deal, you'll be able to finance all these groups in the region. You know what I told him? It's not about money. Your allies are spending 10 times what we spend in this region and are still not able to do anything in this region. It's about the type of relationship, the relationship of proxy, the relationship of master-slave no longer works in this region. You need to be able to establish relationships based on mutual interest.
Okay, final question.
That is the type of relationship that works. We don't dictate to Hezbollah. We don't dictate to the Iraqis. Sometimes we listen to them more than they listen to us.
Why do you think then so many regional parties think that you arm and use militias to control and dictate to them if you don't? What do you say to those many voices, some of which I've quoted, who say you do? Why are they so insistent on...
Because some of them believe that our relations, our arrangements with our friends is the same as their arrangements with their masters.
A final question on Syria. Does Iran have any regrets, any second thoughts, think there was any mistakes made at all in the policy towards Syria to sustain a regime which, as you know, the UN has condemned many times in reports of 2013, even February 2021, as committing, or there's evidence that they've committed crimes against humanity. Do you have any second thoughts?
Well, of course, every crisis, in retrospect, can have been handled much better, could have been handled much better.
So you have some. What are the second thoughts?
We all have opportunities, alternatives that we lost. It's for everybody. But we're not at all unhappy about standing up with the people of Syria to defeat Daesh, as we will stand with the people of Afghanistan to defeat Daesh in Afghanistan and to defeat terrorism in Afghanistan. We stood with the people against extremism, be it in Syria, be it in Afghanistan, be it elsewhere. And we will continue to do that, and we don't have any regrets over it. Of course, we regret every single loss of life in Syria. Of course, if there was a way, if there were a way to find a better approach, a less confrontational approach, a more inclusive approach, we would certainly welcome that. We are very happy that with Turkey and Russia, we started the only game in town. You know that when we started the Astana process, our Western friends believed that it was a non-starter. Now, for the past 4 years, that's the only game in town, and we are very happy that without necessarily agreeing with each other, but we were able to work like adults with Turkey and Russia and bring the daily bloodshed to an end, and I hope we can continue the political process.
Thank you very much. Foreign Minister of Iran, Javad Zarif, you've taken a lot of hard questions. Thank you very much for dealing with them.
Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for your questions.